This is the presentation. I would like to say is a project that I've been working on for some years, and now about to proceed to a new topic that might infringe or expand the knowledge on this. From the little discussion I overheard Ruth's presentation, if I'm correct, I think there were aspects of connections that are related. It's a lecture that I've given a few times, and rethinking and exploring how to move forward with it as a critical study of architecture in Africa. In this case, why is it, the few questions come to my mind. Why is it in the case of Nigeria? We know that capital city or city building are not new. This has been a global experience. In the case of South Africa, let me start with that. What was done, social engineering or national re-engineering was done in a different way. Instead of 3 or 4 large provinces, South Africa evolved into a huge amount of province with about 9 from 4. That is the same process. In the early modern, let me take late 18th century, 1792, it was following the American Revolution of 1776, 1777, they started to plan the District of Columbia, something we know today as Washington, D.C. And so in plan and in theoretical speaking, these projects are connected. And the connections lie both in form and in also ideological and philosophical exploration. In this case, Abuja was born out of a national transition or revolution or change after a civil war. I would also like to say that a parallel there does exist, just like the case of Washington, Brasilia in Brazil, Chandigarh in India, or even prior to that, when the British government was trying to plan an imperial capital, New Delhi, or an imperial capital at Canberra, Australia. These are politically motivated areas or arenas, and certain objects. For some reason, the world, we are all obsessed with monuments or monumentalization of objects. So these aspects are the things that created or led to the establishment of Abuja. And in this case, a few things came together in the case of Abuja. I'll summarize them in a few things. The role of finance, money. And here, it's almost like we are in a parallel environment, except brought about by a plague. And that is this, the reverse of it. 1967 to 1970, Nigeria had a civil war, and a part of the southern part wanted to secede, but the war ended and there was the need for reconstruction. And then this reconstruction follows established national capital experiences. But at the same time, that was the period. If I'm now in my 4th slide, by the way. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see the slides.
All right, please feel free to stop me to ask questions if you have questions. What is interesting to me in this case is that 1973, there was Arab-Israeli war. And the Arab-Israeli war resulted in oil embargo. against the West, because the Arab world thought that the West was supporting Israel. But what this meant was that the oil prices went up. There was the formation of the petroleum exporting countries, OPEC, whose capital is in Vienna. They had a meeting last week, and I'm still wondering, how did the capital of OPEC or their headquarters end up in Vienna? I'm curious about that. I don't know why they kept their headquarters in Vienna, the most unusual thing to hear. And in this case, but what it did was the embargo caused oil prices from about $7 to $10 a barrel to about $40 a barrel. Nigeria now had so much money, it had to spend that money. Just like Kuwait, just like UAR, just like Saudi Arabia. And the question I want to put to your mind is, and the summary of Abuja in one aspect. First, I've talked about the revolution. Second, an established urban model that goes all the way to Washington, D.C. If you look at my screen, you have Abuja there in black to your left. Then you have Washington, D.C., Canberra, New Delhi, Shandigarh, Brasilia. But Washington, D.C.'s plan came from where? Versailles. So there is already a contradiction there. On the one hand, you wanted a revolution that would change the United States of America by the 9 initial colonies from a monarchical regime led by King George III to a democracy. But the plan of Washington, D.C. comes from Versailles, and that is the big mall. If you look at Louis XIV Versailles, you are exactly looking at Washington, D.C. The big difference is the scale. And that is where Major L'Enfant, who planned Washington, D.C., was very familiar with Versailles. His father was an interior designer and a landscape architect under LeBron in Versailles. So you have all these connections. They are not unrelated. And the parallel I would like to point out today is how, because of the plague, which is a form of war on humanity, the oil prices have gone down. How we will emerge out of this economy, I don't know. Who builds what? How do we stimulate it? But let me go back to the case of Abuja, while we keep that question on the back of our minds. The oil prices that went up in 1973, 74, 75, 76. What it did, the climax of that happened about 8 years to 10 years ago when Burj Khalifa was built. And there is a reason I want you to keep that in mind in relationship to Abuja. The tallest building in the world today, one would have imagined, should have been where? In China or in the United States, the two largest economies in the world. But it is not. Where are the tallest buildings? The tallest one now will be in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, probably. After Burj Khalifa has been built, we don't know how tall yet the Saudi building will be. What this tells us is that architecture or urbanism or revolutionary projections, as much as they are symbolic, they are first and foremost projects like products. You can buy architecture like you can buy shoes, like you can buy a car, like you can buy clothing, like you can buy a wristwatch, like you can buy food. You can go to the menu, go to the architect, and you can choose your architecture. And the only thing you need is what? Money. You need money, you need political stability. If you have both, you can buy architecture. And this is what architecture has been since time immemorial. But we don't think of architecture like projects. We don't think of architecture like that. We think of architecture as something very unique, very eternal, very monumental, very homely and encompassing. It does all that, but it still is a project of product. And once that is understood, then you will understand the urban models of Abuja. I'm not sure if you could see my cursor moving on the mall. Can you see it? Hello?
Yes, we can see it.
All right. And then you look at the mall in Washington. Look at Capitol Hill where the cursor is, right there. And I'm going to Canberra. Very small there. You can see the mall there. The new National Assembly by Thorpe is below that. DC, Delhi, you can see the Viceroy, which is now the Prime Minister's residence and office. It's right there. Chandigarh, the same thing, Le Corbusier. And then Brasilia, that is right there, that is the National Assembly, the Twin Towers, a saucer, one, the Chamber of the Deputies, opening up, the Senate opening down, and that is the presidential office, not residence, and this is the Supreme Court, and this is the mall. All of them are the same, terminating at this point. And then the residential wing of Brasilia. All these projects are the same in this sense. There is the 1973 Israeli-Arab War. You can see that in the slide. And that the second thing that has changed this project is the Iranian Revolution and of 1979, very close to the period. Why is that important? What it did was the Iranian Revolution had impact of completely transforming the way we view the world. The word terrorism became everyday lexicon. It created a juxtaposition as if a new type of war was going to happen between the West and the East, mostly the Islamic world. But what this also did was construct a project of modernity that is based on transformations. The climax of the Iranian Revolution was when? 9/11. The pulling down of the Twin Towers, which has been rebuilt, and more constructions and monuments are still happening within that zone. This is the status of the globe we are in. What the Iranian Revolution resulted in was the growth of Osama bin Laden, and then the transformation of how we think about terrorism after 9/11 in 2001. And then in 2000, and then the way we travel, the way we live our lives, the way we are checked at the airport. A similar experience is happening now. But under the shadows of all this was the construction of Burj Khalifa, of the new emergence of China, and then the booming global economy, which at this moment is at a standstill. That oil boom compared or coupled with the emergence of huge resources resulted in the creation of Nigeria's national capital. And more countries are being born. If you look at the map of Sudan, by the way, there is no South Sudan. And I did that deliberately because South Sudan is building a new capital city. And that is, Juba is not going to be the capital. They moved the capital to near a forest reserve. And even the map of Sudan there doesn't show South Sudan. And that shows you how much things have changed. Nigeria gained independence 1960 and this was Princess Alexander on the day of independence. And by 1967, civil war broke out. Nigeria had 4 regions at independence. Soon you will have the Eastern region, Western region, Northern region, but soon at this point in time, Kennedy and Nixon were struggling for power, and Kennedy won the elections at that point. Tafawa Balewa was made the prime minister. there was this optimism of reconstruction of the country, and then suddenly the worst of the situation happened. Nigeria as a country was formed in 1914. From the beginning of that time, there was the search for a capital city. Lagos was merely a temporary space. Why is that important for us to know? And I want us to put South Africa at the back of our mind. How South Africa, from Dutch settlement to British takeover to Anglo-Dutch war, that's what I would call it, which I think everybody knows the war. History describes it separately, to the expansion, the forming of the Dutch republics, the forming of the Union of South Africa, the war of 1898 through 1900, and then Baker coming on the stage to found the Union building. In other words, if you look at the map of Africa prior to 1914 or 1887, there is really nothing like Nigeria. What you would find are separate entities that are just ethnically, or kingdoms that were very ancient. This is an 18th century map of Africa. But from the period Nigeria was established, just like when South Africa was established, you start to see the formation of colonies. The first place that was called a colony was Lagos. And soon, all of the South was described as protectorate. 1914, that was after the Berlin Conference of 1885 to 86. And Nigeria remained two major protectorates, the Northern Protectorate, the Southern Protectorate. Soon, it would change. It would be the colony of Lagos. Debates were being held. And I think, Patricia, you're working on this, on where the capital of Nigeria would be. To my left, 1911, Morel proposed that Nigeria should be divided into the provinces listed here: Eastern Province, Western Province, and then by 1912-14, Temple proposed another kind of capital city, another kind of way of dividing Nigeria. In each case, one said that the capital should be at the Temple said that the capital should be at the center, the confluence of the River Niger and the River Benue. You could see it to your right. But also in Morel's discussion, the capital was to be around there also. But some people said Zungeri and some people said Patige, but always at the center there. Lugard would eventually move the capital. First, this is Lagos here, and Lugard planned that he would move the capital to the top left, over there. And what this tells you is that as Nigeria grew and the provinces expanded, so also the debate on where to keep the capital. Unlike the Union of South Africa, because of the political history of this country, you don't have one political capital. You almost have, it used to be 3 capitals. Now you have 4. 1, Cape Town, where the Parliament building is. 2nd, Pretoria, where the Union building and the presidential official office is. 3rd, Bloemfontein, where the Supreme Court is. 4th, Johannesburg, post-apartheid, the real final constitutional court shifted to Johannesburg, where Justice Cameron, who retired last year, had been. This tells you that these are all political decisions. And South Africa's journey parallels Nigeria's journey, parallels America's journey, whereas the District of Columbia is created as the capital of the United States. They only had 9 states. Now they have 50 states. That is when you added the last 2 states, Alaska and Hawaii. Those were the last final states. Many countries in the world have evolved along these patterns. In the case of Nigeria, you would see from two main regions to three regions: Western, Northern, Eastern, and then soon by 1963, by 1966, excuse me, it is four regions: Western, Midwestern, Eastern, and Northern, still huge. And soon a coup happens, bloody civil war, and that was 1967. Henceforth, Nigeria would be broken. During the war, Nigeria would have had Biafra succeeded. You would have seen Nigeria like that, and then the Republic of Biafra defunct. The Igbos, there are still, not everybody, a few groups are very disenfranchised group, a minority, I would emphasize, saying that they want to have Republic of Biafra. My sense is that it may not happen in my lifetime. It probably may never happen. I could be wrong. But Yakubu Gowon divides Nigeria into 12 states. That is on the left. And that was a reaction to the civil war. To the right, to your right, Ojukwu in black and white, Yakubu Gowon in color. Both fought the war, and soon Nigeria, the war ends in 1970. Murtala Mohammed, right there, to the left, top left, decides another re-engineering, creates 19 states and the Federal Capital Territory. And that's where you see Abuja in the center. Ibrahim Babangida then creates 30 states. Ibrahim Babangida creates 30 states and the Federal Capital Territory. And then Sani Abacha, one of the most difficult dictators in Nigeria, creates 36 states and a Federal Capital Territory. Now, you have to look at this and recognize that each time they created the states, because people thought that the more you created the states, everybody governed themselves, there is a federal government, that there will be peace. It hasn't quite turned out that way. Instead, it's been the reverse. When you look at that, the next leaders of Nigeria, you have the president, the Tafawa Balewa, the prime minister, who received independence. You have military leaders, then you have Shehu Shagari, then you have military leaders again, two of them. And I would like to point one out there. This is Muhammadu Buhari. He ruled for about 18 months, then he's Minister of Defense. Babangida took over, then he handed over. This guy here ruled for 6 months. Then this guy, that's the one who created 36 states. This one created 30 states. And this one created 12 states. This one created 19 states and Abuja. That's the guy who created Abuja. This one handed over government to Obasanjo in 1999, followed by this guy, and this is Muhammadu Buhari. That's the same guy who took power. Now you could see how each administration, each government has been able to create Abuja, and these ones, that's what the country is. That's where the history of Abuja is. And you look at this, the story is in itself. I have shared these stories, how Abuja is synonymous to a project of capitalism or a product. And what called my attention, if you look at the Economist, the page on the Economist there, the right to the left, the promotion, the model there, the model of Burj Khalifa, the center of the world, the center of now, was being shared. This was published in the Economist. And when I saw this model, I believe I was traveling from the States to Nigeria on a trip during one of my research. And that was when it blew my mind away that, buildings are just commercial products. Now, every day, you see United Arab Emirates Airlines being advertised, tourism. into you, and everything that is shown is how the islands, the city is being constructed. Architecture is nothing but a commercial merchandise. Those who have the money would buy it. To think of architecture any other way is to give it a sacred position that it really doesn't have. And that calls your attention to the boats there. That's not World War II. During that oil embargo period, Nigeria had so much money. This is importation of cement and goods. Lagos port could not handle it. Literally, 70% of the boats there are carrying what? Cement. In other words, they are carrying Abuja, literally on the boat. What does that tell you? And this is my own position. Even urban form is a product. It's been circulating at what we call Western architecture is a product that is no longer Western because the urban forms have been circulating around the world perhaps since the 16th century or earlier, since the period of the building of the Castle of Good Hope, since the period of the formation of Elmina Castle, 1492, since the period of 1490, when Bartolomeo Diaz circumnavigated the tip of Southern Africa, and the rise of the modern world. In Western history, we would call it early Renaissance. Architecture is not architecture. Architecture is a product, a merchandise. You can now endow it or imbue it with power as like any other icon, as you would imbue anything you want with power. That is it. And at this period of time, Lagos at the bottom right, too crowded, one major island. You can see the main island way in the center and the mainland bridges. The only bridge that existed was this one. And all of a sudden, huge bridges were being built. Land was being reclaimed. But in the end, if you look at the left, the big map on the left, it was not enough. The ring roads were being built. My sense is that Lagos is going to expand beyond these territories. It's going to keep expanding, and Eco City, Patricia, is being built. In this case, research. How do I do my research? This is a pause. Why the Arab oil embargo? Why 9/11 do I bring them in? Why the formation of Nigeria? The kind of research I do is social history, meaning I follow what is going on in the world. I see how journalists are covering it. I see how scholars are covering it. I see how political leaders are covering it. And then I collate these data as the experience of the period. And in this case, you saw the picture of the port of Apapa, and now you are looking at on August 5, 1975, there are 280 ships at the dock at Apapa. They couldn't offload their cement or cargoes. Some boats spent 6 months, some boats spent 1 year there. Nigeria was thrown into a crisis. In other words, the only example I can give you, you've heard about shopaholics, people who, when they need to go to the store, they go and buy stuff. And at some point, the house fills up to the extent you no longer can remove stuff. You can't even have a place to go. That's what happened to Nigeria. There was so much cement being moved in. This was October 31st. The next one, November or December. And the journalists are asking who did it, who ordered so much cargoes, cement. What do you do when you have so much cement? You build something. They set up a committee. It's called the capital, to study the role of Lagos as a national capital. By this time, they were doing World Black Festival of Arts and Culture, FESTAC. And in Lagos, they were building a national theater, building national stadium. They were doing a lot of stuff, but in the end, it was not enough. They were reclaiming lands. Lagos was seen as too crowded. And they set up, the committee said, move the capital or Nigeria will strangle. They moved the capital away from Lagos. That's what these newspapers tell you. And these papers tell you the way I do my research. This is a convoy. These vehicles you see here, at night, they go to the port to move cement inland. The railroad was not enough to move the cement out of the docks. All these convoys moved from 9 p.m. till 6 a.m. If you were on the road by this hour, guess what? You wouldn't get home. You would be stuck waiting for the convoys. They hummed like huge aircraft to move cement away. In other words, they were moving Abuja. This is how crowded Lagos was. And in the end, it was decided the Lagos could no longer sustain the city. It didn't matter how much land that was being reclaimed. It didn't look at the ring road. This was original Lagos Island. Ikoyi, that's another island. Victoria Island. All of them are being connected by the ring roads. And this ring road, my sense is that one day they're going to move out. It's still timid. You could see how the ring road is expanded. This is Ikeja or Yaba. That's where Lugard said they were going to move the capital in 1914. These are the projects that were being done, but yet it was not enough. That was when Murtala Mohammed came to power, inaugurated Abuja, and they set it up in the center of the country. This is Lagos right here at the corner, left, right corner, and moved to the center for equity. And henceforth, the design, these were the people who designed Abuja. It was villages. The architecture of Abuja was led by Thomas Todd, who passed away. It will be 2 years in July this year, when the lead architect. This is Thomas Todd and Donald Brackenbach right here, Stephen Lockwood. These were the people who were planning Abuja. And that was Stephen Lockwood. This is the original document. I think this is important because research, once you see what is going on with the entities, that is the state, newspapers, journalists, authors, scholarly articles, you also need the evidence from the state, the original documentations. The villages were demolished, and this is now, fast forward 2007, myself interviewing the builders of Abuja to get the real story from them. That's Thomas Todd, who passed last year. David Ham, Okoye is working on the farm. These two have long retired. This one has passed away. How Abuja is done. There is a rock, Aso Rock. They insisted that it forms the vista or the monumental perspective, just like Washington, D.C. And with that, the city was conceptualized as a visual space. Two, the zoning, National Arboretum, Government District, the mall, residential explanade, National Sports Stadium. This area, this part is to be embassies and downtown, business district. Once you understand this conceptualization, this is actually Washington, D.C. You could see Pennsylvania Avenue, you could see Maryland Avenue, you could see Washington Monument here, and you can see the White House there. You can see, excuse me, you can see Thomas Jefferson Memorial, you can see Lincoln Memorial. In the case of Abuja, it is what? It is the stadium. Once you understand that, you also can understand Versailles. And in these are the conceptual developments. It was planned for 3 million inhabitants. who in history wanted to build a city at one point for 3 million inhabitants? Le Corbusier. Remember that. His 1921 plan for Paris, the city for 3 million inhabitants. But also, this city is divided into districts. And you could see this is the conceptual plan. You could see how the zones were created, each zone with its own urban center. And with Abuja here on the map, and then it's shaped like a heart. The symbolism of shaping the Federal Capital Territory, about 3,000 square kilometers, 3,600 square kilometers. That's the size of the state of Rhode Island, the smallest state in the American Union. And this is the airport here. That's the National Assembly. That's Aso Rock right there. But one more thing I would like to point out. Abuja is not a city. It's a province. That has to be understood. It is not a state, it's a province or a state of its own, but it's owned by the Federal Capital Territory. And this is the city of 3 million inhabitants, but there are 10 other cities that were planned simultaneously. You could see those 10 other cities from Osama on the top right, Wari, Kubwa, Suleja, all these. So you have the city of 3 million inhabitants, and then you have the 10 other cities, some of them 50,000, some of them 300,000, some of them 500,000. They are still being planned. Sheda, right here, is a university research town, just like you would have a complete university. These are the two models. To your right, or my right, is Abuja's model, and then to the left, Washington, D.C., you see Capitol Hill there. You see what the hill, what would have been the National Assembly. You see Lincoln Memorial in the center, Washington Memorial. If you go to the behind the National Assembly in Nigeria there, you will find Abuja. You will see an obelisk or a stele, a national monument. You see Lincoln Memorial way in the distance. And from National Assembly here to the Lincoln Memorial at the terminus of the mall is 1.5 kilometers or 1.5 miles, almost a mile and a half. And from here to there is about 5 kilometers. So these are covering huge distances that you are looking at. You can see Pennsylvania Avenue on Washington, D.C. Look at this avenue. And Mr. Todd puts the presidential palace right there, the Supreme Court right here. But this is and then this is the National Assembly. And this is the National Assembly. That's the National Assembly. Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court is right here to my behind Washington. And this is supposed to be Nigeria's Supreme Court. And then this is supposed to be a Library of Congress. That's it. Washington Memorial is right there. Lincoln and Jefferson Memorial are in here beyond the Potomac River. The sketches, I'm not sure how visible these are for you, but these are the perspectives that Thomas Todd created. And to your right here, with the red earth, that's my favorite drawing. From this point on, it's no longer a theoretical design. The city is being made. And suddenly you see Aso Rock, the focal point, which is right there. And suddenly you see the explanade. You see these explanades. And remember, you have in Washington, D.C., you have Independence Avenue, and you have Constitution Avenue. Guess what? One of these is Independence Avenue. One of these is Constitution Avenue. Is that accident? No. And in this case, that's the American firm. The Canadians were invited to plan the National Assembly. They wanted to position it on top of the Aso Rock. Their design was like an airplane taking off. These were the last stages of what you would call high modernism, wherein the city is being envisioned like an airplane taking off, what we have already seen in Brasilia. These are Todd's conceptualization of the National Assembly. He wanted the National Assembly to look like a huge domed rock. Look at the center there, perspective number 1, number 2 on top, if you were to drive around it, number 3 in the middle, and then number 4. And then if you were standing at the National Assembly looking down, this is what you would have seen, a modernist building, almost like what Le Corbusier could have done. Enter Kenzo Tange. Tange dismembers Todd's plan and converts it, stretches it out, now turns it to what? Which city in the world do you know that has an explanade that starts and then turns? Which city in the world? Paris. Champs-Élysées. The Arc de Triomphe. You know of that. In other words, these cities are not being designed exclusively on their own. The Arboretum stays, Aso Rock stays. Now, instead of the centers, the 3 arms zone, National Assembly, Presidential Complex, and then you also have Supreme Court. This is exactly like Brasilia. Federal ministries, Central Business District, National Assembly. You can also say that this is the same thing as Versailles to some degree. And that's President Shehu Shagari receiving the master plan from Kenzo Tange. His wife is right there. And this was the guy that I interviewed to get the original documents, to get the original photographs. So it's not just about doing the research, it's also about getting to the archives, getting to the people, going to Tokyo, going to Tange's buildings to get the sources. And then 2 things. I would like to cut the lecture short so that we can ask questions and I could proceed from there. Here, you would find to your right, Kenzo Tange with a gigantic map of Abuja or model of Abuja from the National Assembly right there with him pointing, and right there to the right, Supreme Court, right there, Presidential Complex, then the mall, federal ministries, Independence and Constitution Avenues. A twin tower was being planned, but I want you to look to the left, 1960, the rebuilding of Tokyo after World War II. By 1960, Tange had proposed how you will rebuild Tokyo. And he intended, this is Imperial Palace right there. When you go to Tokyo, this is the heart of the financial business district right there. The Imperial, he intended that there will be Tokyo will be built over the water. Guess what? It's not yet on the water, but the development high rise is moving from Tokyo Station is right here. It's moving closer and closer. In other words, whereas we may not be able to build it as the visionaries planned, they create the map of the future. So the idea that these projects do not work can be reinterrogated to some degree. Everything Le Corbusier has planned has one way or the other been realized in different parts of the world in some way or the other. So what we describe as unworkable is not really completely true. Some of them have been redone. This model says a lot. I used to beat up on Le Corbusier as naive and all that, but today, my sense is that we have to go higher and higher. Otherwise, we're going to choke our lands up with sprawl. And I need to stop and pause so that we can begin to ask questions, have discussions. To your right, you have details of the models of Tange, and Tange bases it on his earlier 1960s plan, but the plan that is being implemented is that of of Thomas Todd. And there are the political dispensations each political leader, I would like to expand on that, but I want to stop here so that people can have the opportunity to ask questions. I can roll the slides forward to answer questions because I'm sure that you have plenty of questions. Let me summarize a bit before I stop. 1, Abuja is a commercial product. Cities are products. They may be built at different periods, different moments, whereas we envision cities as cultural artifacts. They are indeed produced by financial power. 2, political leaders make different decisions. Abuja is synonymous to grew alongside Nigeria's political evolution. Also, like South Africa, that started from the Cape, let me put it that way, the Republic of South Africa we know today, expanding, going through wars, going through the period of apartheid struggles, and reshuffling to now have 9 provinces. Some of those had to create new parliament buildings. Mpumalanga and Kimberley come to mind, and as well as others. Just like Washington, D.C., just like Brasilia. So we keep all these things in mind. But in the end, the people that are building the highest in the world today is the Middle East because of oil power. Abuja was overbought. Remember, Brasilia was planned for 50,000 inhabitants, 50,000 total. But it is also a territory. Abuja is planned for 3 million. That's 6 times larger than that is Brasilia was, the central area was planned for 50,000, and then the surrounding area 500,000, 500,000. Abuja was planned for 6 times more. Why? The country has enormous amount of money. The next thing I would like to put on the table, political dispensations around the world, when countries have money, they always would buy, except for the much older established democracies. And lastly, whereas the urban form of Abuja can be traced all the way to Versailles through Washington, D.C., Versailles can be traced to where? To the Vatican. In other words, these urban forms have been circulating around the world for a very long time. I'd like to stop here so that we can take questions and we can continue on. You could look at how the 3 arms of the government, that is symbolism, like in Brasilia, to your left, in case of Abuja, the presidential complex, the National Assembly, and then the Supreme Court. But they were not realized as they were planned. The slides are here, I can share them, but I'd like to take questions first before we continue.